Welcome to the Kitchen Table Finance Podcast, where we make retirement planning easy and enjoyable. Discover practical advice to create a retirement strategy that fits your lifestyle and budget.
Hey Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Nick. How are you?
Fantastic.
Excellent.
February 9th as we record this, and spring has sprung. It's going to be
Oh,
60 degrees and sunny in Lansing.
yeah. It's June outside in northern Michigan.
There's one thing I learned about living in Michigan, though, is early spring usually means like a massive snowstorm is headed your way when you don't want it.
Right. That and the old joke: if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Exactly.
at least it's not mosquito season.
Yeah. We got a great topic today, something you and I have been playing around with a little bit as we look at portfolios. But that is, I guess the big question for today is, when should you make changes to your retirement portfolio? Or should you? Do you need to?
Yes.
Like, how do you think about your retirement portfolio? And obviously, on this podcast, we've talked a lot about our investment philosophy of being long-term investors, not market timing. But are there times or reasons that you should be changing your portfolio and how to think about that? So what say you, Mr. Shotwell?
And this is timely for us too, right? Because we just this week, with the help of Mario and Eric at East Bay, our portfolio consultants, made an allocation change.
Yep.
And that's rare for us. And I've joked with a few clients this week that like we're excited to actually get to say, hey, not only do we look at our models every month, this time we actually instituted a change.
We're doing something.
Right. And we've changed the individual funds that we use to implement our allocation. We've made a few changes over the last year or so, but it's been a while since we actually went in and said, okay, we want to change the allocations a little bit.
Yeah.
And just, go ahead.
Back up a little bit and explain like fund changes versus allocation changes.
Right.
Like, why are we changing a fund? What's the purpose behind that?
So think about portfolio analysis on two levels. One being allocation. That's how much you have in stocks versus bonds, or in the case that we're going to get into the details of here a little bit, the subclasses of different types of bonds, different types of stocks, emerging markets versus U.S. small cap stocks, those kind of decisions. And studies have shown, analysis of portfolios in the stock market show that drives like 90% of your outcome.
Right.
And I forget the exact numbers, like 91, 92%, something like that. Vanguard and some other firms have studied it ad nauseum. But we get all hung up on like which mutual fund is the best, or which stock or which bond is the best. What really drives most of the long-term outcome is how much you put in stocks, how much you put in bonds.
Right.
And then the sub asset classes add another layer of that. So that's one level of analysis. Then the second level of analysis is, okay, you've decided you want in your particular portfolio 10% to be in emerging market stocks. What's the best fund for emerging markets?
Right.
And there we're looking at internal expenses and how it matches its benchmark. And, we have this matrix we go through of we want 10% in emerging markets. What do we think the best choice for that is right now?
Right. Yep.
So what, if you think about it on those two distinct levels, what we're talking about today is the first level, the asset allocation, not the implementation, which fund to choose. So what we changed this week is how much we have in short-term bonds relative to intermediate-term bonds. And so we've kept more money in short-term bonds over the last few years because interest rates were really low and only had one direction they could go until last year. And when interest rates are low and they can only go up, rising interest rates are bad for bond prices and push them down. And the longer the bonds are in term, how far into the future they mature, the more they're affected by that.
Right.
So short-term bonds don't move down as much when interest rates go up. Intermediate-term bonds, which are intermediate in nature, meaning they're not short. They're out there a few years, but they're not super long term either. The range is between 3 and 10 usually. So those move a little more than short term bonds, but they also pay you more interest while you hold them.
Right.
Now that interest rates are higher. So now we're back to a more normal interest rate environment where interest rates could go down from here. In fact, everybody's
Mm-hmm.
kind of expecting them to, which pushes bond prices up, and intermediate term
Mm-hmm.
bonds respond to that more than short term bonds. And also, intermediate term bonds are now paying us a reasonable amount of interest to hold them.
Right.
So we took half of our extra weight in short term bonds and moved that back to intermediate bonds.
Yep.
And so what kind of teed off our conversation here for today is not just the technicalities of what we just did, but like how is that different from our philosophy against market timing, right?
Yes. Right.
You
Because on the
know,
surface, it sounds like we're timing the market
yeah,
and we're trying to, make a decision based on what's happening now.
yeah.
But walk us through like that decision
Well,
process and how we think about that.
so what we're looking at here is what we consider a long-term kind of structural change in the market. Interest
Mm.
rates were low for a very long time. Now they're back to a more normal state. We don't know. I guess the distinction is this: timing the market would be saying, okay, we think the Fed is going to lower rates substantially by next January, so we're going to push a whole bunch of extra money into intermediate term or longer term bonds to take advantage of that, and then we're going to shift back.
Right.
That's market
Yep.
timing. And
Mm-hmm.
like the stock market corollary would be, okay, we think that, small company stocks are going to be the next hot spot in the market, so we're going to put extra weight there temporarily to take advantage of that. That's market
Yep.
timing. This is instead looking at a big structural change in the market, not trying to guess what the Fed's going to do today, tomorrow, next month, next quarter, next year, but saying it can move either way now, and the structure of the market has fundamentally changed, the risk reward
Right.
relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a couple of things to point out there that you said. One is, we're looking at when we're making a change like this, we're looking at the long term structural, right? We're
Yeah.
long term investors. And so we're matching up our asset allocation with our long term goals versus
Yeah.
trying to, go in and out based on short term theories of what may or may not happen and focusing on the short term. When we're making
Exactly.
decisions like this, it's always about what's going to happen long term because that's why we're
Yeah.
investing, right?
Yeah. The Fed can go either way. Interest rates can move either way over the next couple of years, and we're still going to feel pretty good about this decision, I think, because
Right.
if interest rates do go up from here, yes, it hurts us a little bit more, but we're being paid more interest now too. So we've like weighed that in, like what's the, how could this move? What could happen? And it's structural. It's a different kind of dynamic than just trying to time what's going to happen next.
Right.
So yeah, so I think it also begs the question, like what would be like the stock market corollary of that,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
like when would you change how much you have in large company value stocks compared to large company growth stocks? And it's a little more nuanced because the income and different things kind of offset some change risk in bonds. But it's the same kind of like what are the structural changes in the market that might cause that?
Right.
And we talked to Mario about this. Not that we're looking to make any of those changes right now, but like what would spur that if so we have more to talk about today, right? Um, and he was talking about how like one example of a structural change would be that when we build a portfolio, we look at how like you start with the all country world index kind of as your base. That's like looking at
Yep.
all the stocks all over the world. Um, and then you look at like, okay, what percentage of that is US stocks? And so how much in your portfolio do you want to have in US stocks versus international stocks? And
Mm-hmm.
we don't want it, we can be overweight one way or the other a little bit, but we want to be, within a particular range of that or have a good reason not to be. But that changes over time. as the markets
Right.
evolve. And so how that the constitution of the all country world index might influence like how we want to change our portfolio allocations over time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is valuations
Yep.
being something that now we're not changing like every quarter, like this is overvalued, that's undervalued. But if we started to see like structural changes where certain things were way undervalued for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
that might lead us to overweight those asset classes in the future, or at least consider
Yeah.
it. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, and anytime you make a move in the market, like say we decided we needed to adjust our international exposure down and add more to domestic exposure for the reasons we just talked about, then it begs the question, what do you do with that, right? Where do you add that money?
Right.
So
Yeah.
you've always got to be considering that side of the equation too.
Yeah, and I think, if you think about portfolio and portfolio construction, it's kind of, we talk about it all the time on this podcast too, but a lot of it is like fighting your own instincts, right? Like
Right.
one of the hardest thing to do in investing is not do anything, even though, if you look at the news or if you read any of this stuff, like, especially right now, if you look at like U.S. stock performance, you look at the S&P 500, you look at large
Right.
cap growth, you look at what's going on with the tech sector of the market,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
everything is screaming these things are going crazy, and maybe I should overweight it. And there's that emotion behind it, and some of the hardest
Right.
things to do is to not make those changes, right?
Yeah. 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 Don't let fear of missing out drive your portfolio changes, right? Don't
Right.
let and just try to remember that instinctually we're programmed to want to take action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that in the normal world is a normal response based on evolution. That's why we feel that way. But when it comes to the markets, that usually gets you in trouble. You'll end up,
Right.
it's going to put you in a position where, long story short, you're going to end up buying things just as they're peaking.
Right.
And then you're riding them down and losing money, relatively to where you were. And then you're going to want to make the same mistake again to correct it.
Right. Yeah.
So so yeah, you lead yourself around in a circle, and you
Mm-hmm.
just need to create a discipline and stick to it. And when you do make changes, consider, what if I'm wrong? What if this doesn't work out in the short run, doesn't work out in the long run? How does that play out?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I said, it's a difficult thing to do right now. We're going into our review season with our clients, and, portfolio performance, when you compare, depending on what you're comparing it to, which is probably a whole different podcast, like how to compare your
How to
portfolio,
index?
like
Yeah,
how to
yeah,
index at it, like what should you actually be looking at? Because the only thing you see on the news, or if you pull up the Wall Street Journal, is usually the S&P 500, the Dow, the NASDAQ, and those, for 99% of people, are not good proxies for what your portfolio should actually be doing,
right,
right?
right, right. Neither is your cubicle mate's
Yeah.
portfolio. As our uh, the author that we quote often, Morgan Housel, would say, you're probably not playing the same game, so don't try to play by the same rules.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yep. Absolutely.
so
And your cubicle mate's probably only telling you about the things that went up, probably not
yeah.
telling you about the
Oh,
bad the bad bets he made either.
oh yeah, yeah. This used to come up more often, but a prospect or somebody you meet randomly would find out you're in financial planning and investing, and would want to tell you about their latest great stock or something their son had bought. And it's like, okay, great, but tell me about your three worst.
Yeah.
That's what I
Right.
want to hear about. And not to be insulting, but that's where we're going to learn lessons, right? Don't tell me about the one
Mm-hmm.
you got right. Tell me about the three or four you got wrong and what you learned from it.
Yeah.
And you get, sometimes you get forthright answers. I've got a few people I talk to regularly that have made errors and are more than happy to talk about what they learned from it. But that's part and parcel, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Before we close today, do you want to talk about how rebalancing might play into this?
Well, yeah, back to the idea of valuations and changes in the portfolio, one of the things we do regularly with our models is rebalance back to our targets. So
Mm-hmm.
when we see relative valuation changes in different subclasses of stocks, like if our core large company stock holding goes up because of the magnificent seven that everybody's talking about lately, the big tech stocks that have been driving the market, and our value part of our portfolio is now lower. When we rebalance quarterly, we're automatically taking those things that have gone up in value and are now more expensive and buying the things that we know will come back that are at a lower price now.
Right.
So
Yep.
that instills some of that discipline, and that's part of why we don't necessarily need to make um, allocation changes very often, because we're
Mm-hmm.
already taking advantage of the market ups and downs along the way.
Yeah, rebalancing is one of those, very easy things that you can do. I mean, most, whether you're in your 401k or, a lot of these technologies now allow you to do that on a regular
Yeah,
basis. But it is that, it
yeah,
forces you to buy low and sell high, which
right,
is, always
right.
going to be a win.
Well, and a lot of folks now in their 401ks and 403bs are using target date funds, what we call
Yep.
fund of funds, right? And under the
Mm-hmm.
cover of those things, the managers of those portfolios are automatically rebalancing regularly as
Right.
money flows in. So,
Yep.
um,
Yeah.
so that takes advantage of the same thing. Um, so, kind of to wrap this up, too, though, is to note that what we're talking here is kind of like after you've already decided the risk level of your portfolio.
Yes.
And we've outlined, for a future topic here in a couple of weeks, when to change risk levels in your portfolio,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because that's that. So I talked about there being two levels of analysis. There's actually a 1A that goes before the 1B that I mentioned, and that's how much risk should you be taking, because
Right.
that determines your allocation, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So we'll get into that a little bit more in another recording, but how much on a high level, that's how much you should have in cash, stocks, and bonds relative to each other, and
Right.
how that
Yeah.
changes over your lifetime. So
Yeah. It's a great teaser, Dave.
there you go. I'm all about teeing up the next one. Stay tuned.
I love
Stay
it.
tuned.
If our listeners have any questions on retirement portfolios, please reach out to us at info@srbadvisors.com. Dave, as always, it has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Nick. Talk to you later.
This is a Zedia Media production.